So our first topic here, building good morale. Because how do you have a good team without good morale? So Lisa, let's kick this off with you here. Have you ever been the leader of a team that was really perceived as an underdog or was in a losing situation that you got to turn around?
Well, I have been on a lot of winning teams, I should say, but there have been times when we were in losing situations, and I think whether you're looking at a business team or a sports team, you sort of would like to respond the same way. And I think in building morale as a leader, I think number one, it's important to lead by example, to show your teammates that you're in it with them in the moments when it's not going so well. And I think in the moment when it's not going well, you learn the most about people. And I know I would gather, my teammates, whether it was on the court, and just talking about being in the moment right here. Don't look at the whole picture, the fact that we're down or that we're losing or that we're behind on a project. You want to really think about breaking it down into small portions. When building morale, it's like, look, let's take 3 minutes, let's take 5 minutes, let's take one day at a time to try and focus on doing our best right now. Let's try and close the gap here. And I think in sports, sometimes you can see that if you're down by 10, you're down by 20, it seems like the game's over. But in building morale, I've found that when you stop and really gather the people and look them in their eyes and say, hey, right now we can do this, we can do better, let's give our best effort. And so I think when you're building morale, it's good to not try and be overwhelmed by the whole picture, of the project that's due, but maybe to try to cut it into small pieces and then be there for each other. Another thing that I found was being supportive of other teammates when maybe I'm doing well, but someone's not doing well. When you show moral support by saying, hey, I'm here with you, I can help you do something extra, I can meet you early to shoot extra shots, or I can meet you early, to help work on your part of the project. I think it shows a lot of morale when you just not talk about what we should do, but you're really showing action. And I found that to be very helpful for me in times when things weren't going so great.
That's very interesting, just stay in the moment, really break it up into pieces, and that's good advice. Some of you may have read this book, Outliers, by Malcolm Gladwell, and in it he talks about the rapid decline in airline crashes over the past, 10 years, 15 years. And one of the reasons that he cites is better communication between the pilot and the co-pilot, and the fact that the co-pilot feels like they can speak up to the pilot when they see something going wrong. That alone has really contributed to the decline, is what he said. Bridgette, when you come into a situation where the employees feel like maybe they can't speak up, they've been held down by previous bad management, how do you really foster that sense of being able to speak up and share their expertise?
That's a good question. A lot of the times that I've come in and morale has been a challenge, my first 30 days sometimes makes it worse because I'm cleaning something up. And you get people that are concerned. They don't know if their job's going to be there. They don't know what the culture is going to look like on the other side of the turnaround. And all these are very real problems that hit you very quickly. Because a lot of times the employee stakeholders, they don't always realize that the company's in trouble until maybe it's out there and it's in the marketplace and everybody's aware. But I think there's 3 things that help. One is to be responsive. If you sit on a question, I think people have a sense that either they're not important, they're not being validated, or that you're not going to be very communicative along the way. And then second, you got to be honest, even if it's a really bad message. You got to say, hey, look, this is the situation, and be real with them and let them know what's going on. Because later on, even as your messages start to improve in terms of the content and the excitement associated with things, as things get better, they'll believe in the better things as you go along if they could believe in the difficult messages early on. And then the last thing is to communicate, communicate, communicate. You can't have too few employee town halls. You can't have too few meetings in the hallway. You can't stop by too many employees' desks to just put your hand on their back and say, hey, I know things are a little bit difficult, but I have really noticed that you're working hard on this, and your contributions, they make a tremendous difference. And that regular commitment to communication builds an expectation with people that I think translates in their head to something like this. If I need to know something, I will hear it. And it starts to build trust. And so when you talk about morale and either improving it or dealing with its decline, I think those 3 key things really make a tremendous difference.
Paul, how do you apply those tenets to SAP-specific projects where really keeping up morale can be a huge challenge?
We haven't had any morale issues in our SAP project. I think, I think as a leader, you have to set expectations, right? So one of the things we try to do in our projects, and the way we're set up is we kind of have a template for our distribution centers, and we roll that out across the country, either for our core business units or as we do M&A activity. And usually we start that off with a big kickoff and a lot of hoopla around it, and our CEO comes in, and usually I get part of that presentation, and I talk about the valley of despair. Not that any of you have ever felt that, but there is a valley of despair curve. And, I have this great, very, I call it a very rudimentary graph, and it just kind of goes like this, and then it's way down here, and there's a face crying in the middle, and and I do that because, SAP is much more about business transformation and behavioral change than it is about the system. And we all know that from our own experience, but you try to set the folks who are going through that, set their expectations that at go live, you're going to get this great bump. Everybody's going to be excited. We got the project, quote, done. And really, they're just starting. So all that adrenaline gets that big bump, and then, the project team starts to pull off, and now they're left to their own devices, and people start making mistakes. And, it really plummets very, very fast. And morale is a huge, challenge there. So what we do is we just plan for that. We plan for the right level of go live support. We plan to come back and retrain and retool and get people through it. And but I think setting, I like to at least tell myself, setting the expectations up front, helps people through it. At the end, I think it's just one of those things people have to go through, in order to get to the other side. But as a leader, you set the expectations, and then you put the right support systems in place to help them get through it.
So you actually tell them you're going to feel like this sad face.
We do. And most of them say, we're so good, we're going to be the best Chalmers Sunbelt Group business unit going through this. We're never going to feel that. And, again, as a leader, you don't want to say, and crush their hopes and dreams. No, you are going to feel that, right? You just want to say, look, there's a reality check here. You're changing everything about your business process, your people, your roles, responsibilities, and the technology you use to get your job done. It's going to be painful. So.
That's very interesting. Jason, from SAP, what do you have to say about that?
There is no valley of despair, no. Well, from an SAP perspective, I think you hit it on the head. I mean, it's not only about the technology, it's about the culture. It's about making sure you're nurturing the people along the way, because once the consultants leave, obviously people still need to do their jobs, and they need to be able to embrace the technology in order to do that. And adoption is actually one of the hardest parts of any project in terms of the sustainability after the fact. And I think, to Lisa's points about really making things, 3, 5 minutes, 1 day, it's really walking people through those first steps, making sure that they can get comfortable with what they're doing, so that it becomes not just while the trainer is sitting there, I'm going to kind of jump through the hoops to kind of make my boss happy. It's actually getting them to embrace it, to work with it, and make it their own ultimately. Because if they don't take that step of making it their own, then when you go back to do an evaluation 3 months later, you're going to find that, hey, they went back to the spreadsheet, they went back to the former system, because you haven't fully handed off until they're self-sufficient and running it on their own. But that is definitely a curve that needs to be gone through. And any of us that have picked up a sport or picked up a new set of software, there has to be a certain amount of tenacity to stick with it and actually bring it across that line.
I wanted to ask you one more thing. If you've stepped into a situation with your employees where perhaps they had a bad manager before, what's some of your advice along those lines? How do you deal with that?
Well, I think there's a few things, right? One, I think you need to really take a hard look at what that specific situation where those folks were coming from, because one of the hard things is to go, everything was terrible, you guys have done a bad job, and I'm here to turn it around. And nobody wants to hear that. I think most people in their roles really are trying to do the best they can. So even in that hard situation, you need to be able to go in and look at what was working right, and how can we build on that as a foundation. And I think setting up, as Bridgette said, kind of that 3-step game plan of let's do an honest assessment. Like, not everything was great, or else I wouldn't be here, right? But let's talk about what was good and what we're going to change and the steps we're going to go through to get there. And I think people really respond when they have a solid framework within to which, where they know how are we going to measure success and how are we going to get there. And I think if you really set out that measurement and how we're going to go and how we're going to build on what was there before, the good parts, and bring in some new things to really make this a high-performing team, I think people can really respond to that.
So I think the overall message here about creating good morale is you really have to set the expectation, but also don't sort of tell your people to boil the ocean. You know, break it up into small pieces and take it day by day, minute by minute, you know, whatever's going to work for your particular team. Sounds like the takeaway from there. So now time for more movie trivia and prizes. Anyone?
There's no crying in baseball.
Very good.
That's awesome.
Okay. What about this one? Very good, yep. All right, so that introduces our next